Is that cold?
Please, sir.
That place
Hush,
on
that he
Borges football
walked
team
over.
is
And
that
Krista
good?
said, "Do you know her?" And he goes, "Oh yeah."
He's really
His
good.
boys, well, he had 3 boys, but they all
apparently
graduated.
Yeah, right. You gotta forget it.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah, they started college.
if
You don't know who that
somebody
Bianca is
announced,
then.
I
I mean,
have
we're the
no
only
idea.
part, Windy Hills are the only part of Ward 4 that gets picked up on Friday. So I could live with it if somebody announced for Ward 3.
We'll call the planning and zoning meeting together for Tuesday, November 13th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Tony Gokenbach, Mark Hydrich.
Aye.
Mark Kleesner.
Here.
Mark Piontek,
Here,
Tom Holtmar.
Here.
Cindy Lucy,
Here.
John Bortman, Chuck Watson.
Here.
Samantha Wacker, Carolyn Witt.
Here,
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. John's here, too.
Saw that.
Here.
Pledge allegiance.
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the October 8th, 2018 meeting. You've had a chance to look those over.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to item number 3, case number 181101, Maria Whitworth, preliminary plat approval for 4975 and 4979 South Point Road. John?
Okay, good evening, Commission. Within your packet, I think Sal laid out the staff report. I did have an opportunity to sit down with him and go through it. I believe that the previous meeting, I think, had the property being rezoned to R1C, which does allow for single-family attached zero lot lines. In this specific request, they're wanting to subdivide the property into from a single lot to two lots. I believe the property owner wants to release one of the properties to a different owner. So this is the mechanism to do so. Within that report, I think you see that staff recommends approval of this. It's a pretty straightforward item. I think you've seen this many times. So,
Any questions or comments of John? Hearing none, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this? If there's no further
I guess there's
discussion.
No disapproval. Neighbors.
No further discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
also move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on, item number 4, case number 181102, Charles and Linda Johnson, special use permit, 504 West 3rd Street, short-term lodging. John?
yes, once again, I think this is a request that's come forth to you a few times, not the specific request, but the same type of item. The property is located 3rd Street, pretty close to the intersection of 3rd and Olive. They are requesting to use, I think they need a special use permit to use this dwelling as like an Airbnb. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Once again, the staff report, I think, lays out that we didn't receive any formal complaints back. The property actually just next to it is also utilized as an Airbnb. They do have off-street parking, so I don't think there's anything here that would be detrimental to the surrounding properties. So we would, once again, staff does recommend approving this request.
And John, nobody
Not to my knowledge, and I did
brought
check with,
anything up from any neighbors?
no. Nope, I did check with Sal about that late last week, and we've not received anything.
I don't think we had any on the last one, too, the one that's
I don't recall, but we didn't specifically discuss any items that would be, negative to not approving this. So I would recommend approval. Our staff recommends approval.
Any other questions or comments?
No, I would say, I mean, it seems to be obviously within the character of the neighborhood. It's right next door to another such business, so I
Yeah,
don't see.
the other one, I think, was the first one in Washington, wasn't it?
Could have been.
Winters.
Yeah.
I
it
think
was
Can't
one of the
specifically.
early-
one of the early ones.
Was before the bed tax, I think.
It's a good place for it.
Yeah, I would say it's a good location, especially with us receiving preliminary approval for a grant to redo 3rd Street sidewalks. It does provide a good access for walking to the bridge and downtown facilities. So this type of use seems like it would fit pretty well.
Any other questions, comments? Anyone else that would like to speak? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Moving on to other business, historic preservation landmark information. John, is this informational or motion or?
I believe that this is informational. I was not at the historical preservation meeting, but there were various locations. I apologize, I was anticipating somebody from the historical preservations to be here tonight to talk about this.
Well, we have somebody.
We do have somebody.
I didn't know if you were going to speak, though. So what we have is, I believe the properties are under, they are owned by Downtown Washington or various
Well,
groups. So
the Historic Washington Foundation.
There we go.
C3 branch of the downtown. And the Historic Preservation Commission discovered that we have the ability to nominate local landmarks. And after the loss of Fifth Street School, we decided this was something we need to pursue because even though it would not necessarily prevent something like that, it would make it an issue that it would have to go through more steps. It wouldn't be just you come over here and get a demolition permit and it's history. Or you come to the Historic Preservation Commission, which has no teeth, and say, I'm going to tear down this building, and we all have a fit, but that we can't stop it. So this way, if you designate something, it doesn't mean that it couldn't change. It's something that the historic designation does not mean it's guaranteed through eternity, but at the same time, it puts some restrictions on it so that it has to go through a lot of hoops to get to that point where it's destroyed, it's gone. And of course, the Historic Preservation Commission is very into trying to preserve and not let that happen because we've lost so many things. If I wouldn't, bless you, I wouldn't expect everybody to have, pursued this with a fine-tooth comb, but if you look at it at all, you realize how much research. The idea is also that we don't make this so easy that just because you live in an old house, you decide you want it to be a local historic landmark. To get to this point that you come to the Preservation Commission and then come to the Planning and Zoning, and then we pass it on to the council. We're not requiring, we're not expecting any money. This is just a designation. And so these were three things that were owned by the Historic Washington Foundation, and they are all contributing members to our community. The Gottfried is a guest house. It's one of the oldest structures, the log. If anybody remembers, back in the dark ages, it was downtown Washington's first office. I think that's also the building that had the Sesquicentennial office in. Anita Yeager and the people, that was their headquarters while we were doing all the Sesquicentennial because everybody could find it. Everybody knew where it was. And then the post office is such a contributing member to our downtown. We are so fortunate to have a downtown post office presence still in the downtown area. And it's also generating income. There's an office in there. You can rent or have access to a meeting room. And they are currently working on trying to get the basement a little more coordinated to be able to rent out. And then the third one is the farmer's market, which no one can deny has become the heart of any event we have downtown. We have 2 apartments. We have waiting lists to get into them. We have a cooperation agreement with the city where the Historic Foundation owns the building, but downtown, or the city rents the lower level.
That's correct. Yeah, we rent the lower level, and we maintain the public restrooms as well.
Which is wonderful. I can tell you, I date back to the days where there were no public restrooms in downtown Washington, and I saw a lot of people in the library because it was there. And it's wonderful to have excellent restrooms right there. We just got the tree up. We'll have the mayor's Christmas tree lighting the Friday after Thanksgiving. So all 3 of these things that have been put before you, we feel are worthy of this designation. And again, it's very easy because the ownership of the building is presenting this to you, that they are seeking this designation. It is possible to designate a property. The Historic Preservation Commission can designate a property without the owner's support or, because it doesn't, and of course, you can think of several places in town, one particular that might be something that might be targeted down the road. But right now, we're not looking for any controversy. This is just three particular structures that we would appreciate your support in getting their designation.
With
And as I
that-
said, it goes from us to the council. And someone will be at the council meeting if there are any questions. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer.
With that, I mean, are you requiring approval from whatever for any changes if they decided to structurally
Well,
change the thing and stuff?
they're
or-
not, what happens is that if they choose to change anything, they have to come back to the Historic Preservation Commission, and they have to go along with our guidelines. In other words, they're not going to paint it green or something. So, that
Would-
will be, it doesn't, it doesn't forbid anything like if something comes up that needs to be done. I know they're working on getting the money. I don't know whether they've done it yet, the tuck pointing of the farmer's market. But that doesn't change, you know,
Right.
but it's not like you may not, you know, we're not that. But at the same time, we have very, very good guidelines for anything, a contractor, an owner, anybody that has an interest in doing something with a historic structure. We have suggestions, we have help
Okay.
to guide them, if they'll listen.
So Carolyn, when you say designating this as a landmark would put some steps or some potential prohibitions on destroying it, what could be done? Let's say that someone buys the farmer's market and decides it's time to tear it down. What would they have to do?
Well, they would have to come to the Historic Preservation Commission, and they would have to, we could not prevent it happening, but they would have to make their case to us, and we would say, deny it, and say, you're not getting a review from us to do this. So then they would go to the city council, and the city council would have the authority to say, it can be destroyed. And it could be that something like, let's say there's a fire or a gas explosion or some sort of issue that the building becomes uninhabitable, whatever, can't be lived in. The city council has the power to override the designation because they grant it and they can override it.
So
But I'm gonna tell you what, that group's pretty tough. They will come and they will talk to you.
Yeah.
And they will convince you otherwise. I'll
But the idea of us having an opportunity to voice our, we really felt that we didn't have an opportunity. There was total lack of communication between us and the Lutheran Church, Emmanuel Lutheran, to really get a conversation going. A decision was made, and it was done. And it was like, you know, I was ready to chain myself to the door, but no one thought that was a good idea. But I know, I try not to get too hysterical. But the idea is that nothing is in concrete. But at the same time, there are some steps to go through to get everybody a chance to think about what is actually being proposed.
So my question would be then, at that point, could the city council then deny the request to destroy the property?
I assume so.
And Mark, is that right? Am I thinking that that's correct?
I'm not sure that that's correct. The council, I'm just kind of quickly reading the code here. In the event of a finding by the city of an unsafe condition, an abatement order may be issued by the city without compliance, provided that all reasonable efforts have first been made to preserve and correct unsafe conditions rather than damage or demolish valuable building structures or objects. So there is some authority, I presume, for the city to deny a demolition permit, but remains to be seen whether or not that's.
Well, and here again, if
So
it's
I-
unsafe,
Right.
or if there's, you know, it's to the point where demolition is the only, I mean, you know, we recognize that there are, the antique, the feed store antique that Andy. Right. I mean, that was very clearly explained and illustrated how the foundation, you know, if you fix the sidewalk, the wall was gonna fall in. I mean, you know, so that gives the option that if it is a hazard, you know, the city wouldn't seek to keep it up if it wasn't going to be safe and maintained.
The part of the code that you just read, Mark, I'm curious, it sounds like there's an assumption within that there was some unsafe condition. Let's assume that there was no unsafe condition, there was nothing that was threatening anybody, it's just somebody buys a property that's designated as a landmark and then they feel like tearing it down. Can the city say no?
And I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Well, in this document, it says, the Washington Historic Preservation Commission recommends a prohibition of demolition of any contributing structure detailed in the nomination unless reviewed and approved by the commission. So, and then the immediate authority over us is the council. So,
But
you can take your case there if you can't convince us, which is.
But-
I think this whole thing just kind of slows the process down.
Yeah, that's the
you know,
idea.
To slow it down, that it just can't happen.
Because I think we started working on Fifth Street, it was less than 6 or 8 months, and we were waiting to see if we got a grant, which we didn't get. And the next thing we know, they are saying demolition will occur before Christmas. I mean, it was like, can you give us a little time? Could we talk to you about this? No, decision was made. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Something that's inevitable may happen, but at least you've made your case as much as you can to as many as you can.
So if someone had something that was owned by the private sector or something like that, that person could also submit their property, but you'd have to go through the process.
Yes, yes.
Getting it accepted and.
Right. And as I said, now these, you know, you're not probably gonna have, and the chances of any of that being sold by the Historic Washington Foundation are very small, but if you have a home, or the VFW could submit it, I mean, it's on the National Register, I think, but to have it designated a local landmark as well, you could go through this paperwork, this research, or a home like Mark Hausman's, the Tias House. He could have that a designated. Well, someday that's going to sell, it's going to change hands. And you're right, somebody goes, this will make a really good parking lot, or whatever. And so, you know, anything we can do to slow that down and find somebody to buy it, to have an interest to invest in it, to keep it, is what we would like to see happen rather than.
As a prime example, the latest property on Lafayette.
Yeah, right here, which I noticed they have a dumpster. He's working on it. And we'll see how that turns out.
So theoretically, the Preservation Commission could try to designate something even if they didn't own it.
Absolutely.
So as of now, these are the first and only 3, right?
Well, the other thing that's already been approved is the Oddfellows Cemetery, you know, the
Columbarium.
the columbarium, and which is not necessarily historic, but it's still a very important contributing structure. And then the gazebo there is historic. It was once a 2-story, and now it's just the 1-story, but it goes back a long way. And it had been moved from the park, I think. And that was the first thing that we did. And again, the Historic Preservation, the Historic Preservation Commission worked with the Oddfellows to put the paperwork together to request, and that was the first thing that was approved. But I mean, you know, you're talking a cemetery, there's not a lot of planned growth. You know, that was probably not
Or
something
destruction.
Yeah, that was probably not something we really had to worry about, but it was the first thing that that was the first time we really tried to put something, and we didn't know what the procedure was, because it had never been done. We only found out about this very recently, and time-wise, to know that we could do this.
So you had to dip your toe in the water to see what that was.
Exactly. We
Right,
figured,
now they've
who's going to
constructed some
argue
more.
about the columbarium and the gazebo?
They thought it was safe, so.
That's right, this was a
Mark,
safe.
do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just note here, even if they in the example Carolyn gave, if somebody comes in and buys a building downtown and wants to demolish it, they have to come in for review by the Preservation Commission. But even if the Preservation Commission recommends against demolition, that's not binding. And the council can't refuse to allow them to demolish that building either. There's nothing in the code that talks about that. Everything talks about, and there are some exceptions which we just addressed recently, but basically it says a certificate of review is not binding on the applicant, so.
The only place that we have mandatory review and mandatory compliance is something that's in a TIF district and receiving tax abatement.
Right.
So, Mark, is there not a procedure then for a hearing before the city council if the Historic Preservation Commission would not sign off on the destruction of a landmark?
The next thing
No.
is they'd have to,
Oh. Oh.
well, we were under the impression that once this designation was made, it was more of a protection.
And that's not what I see in here. There's nothing in here that says, once it's been designated a landmark or a landmark, that it can't be demolished. It does have to go through the review process,
Yeah,
but
it has
that's,
to
And
just
it's still just
that's,
a recommendation.
that's not binding.
still,
And Mark, this might be, I mean, way too academic or way too legal academics, but would the Historic Preservation Commission theoretically have standing to file a suit for an injunction under those circumstances?
I don't know on what basis they would do it, because there's nothing in the code that prohibits demolition of a designated landmark.
I mean, could they allege irreparable harm to the city or something in that regard?
I guess you can allege anything you want, but they wouldn't be in violation of any of the city's ordinances as long as they went through the review process through the commission. As long as they did that, they're, under our codes, they're free to tear it down.
well, Carolyn, I know you've put a lot of effort into this with the Preservation Commission.
Well, I'm gonna,
And I
I'm gonna
think
go
that's
back
good.
and tell them that, and, because our understanding was a little different. And, I'll hit up Sal.
Well, that's what, yeah.
Because I wouldn't put you, because he was kind of our guide, he was our liaison with the ordinances and so we'll see, maybe we can have something.
So do we need to vote whether to put
Yes.
these on?
Yes.
We'll need a
Yes.
motion to send to council.
Do we need to do them each separately, Tom?
You can do them as a group or you can do them individually, either way.
I mean, I would move that the entire group of properties be submitted to council for approval as local landmarks.
I'll second that.
First and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you.
John,
Keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you.
I have nothing further.
good job on Bluff Road.
Just one, move on to the next thing.
What's next?
We need some weather so I can get Oak Street paved. Some good weather.
Okay.
So,
Any other items by board members or anyone to bring up? If not, I'll entertain one last motion.
Motion to
Motion
adjourn?
adjourned.
Oh, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
Nieberg and Witt had a furniture store and a funeral
We have to
home.
change
So did Auto,
City ordinance.
funeral home and auto furniture. And the reason they did that was the furniture